So Luther became a monk. He lived in a monastery, a place where monks more or less left the society and lived apart, so that they might not be tempted by the things of the world. There he studied and learned so that he might be a priest. During Luther's time in the monastery, he desperately wanted to please God, but he was unsure how. He believed that God wanted him to be good. Not just good, but perfect. But he could not measure up. He avoided doing bad things, but he could not avoid thinking wrong things. When he did think rightly, then he was worried that he became prideful about his own goodness. In an effort to please God, he would starve himself, he would hit himself, he would work long hours. He wanted to display to God that he was sorry for his sins. He wanted to show God that he deserved mercy. Luther impressed his superiors in the monastery, and he was selected to take a special journey to Rome, which was at the time the center of the church. Luther hoped this trip would provide him with peace with God. But instead he saw the church in Rome abusing the people, taking their money, telling them lies. Luther was quite a smart man, and after some time in the monastery, he was sent to be a doctor of theology. He was tasked with teaching people who were studying God's word so that they also could be priests. He was sent to a university in Wittenberg, Germany, and quickly he became a popular preacher and teacher. As it was his job to teach future priests about the Bible, Luther had a chance to study the Bible more and more closely. And as he studied God's word, he discovered something. God did not want to punish sinners, but to forgive and save them. He didn't send Jesus to show people how good they needed to be, but to show them the depth of his love and the lengths he would go to for the salvation of humanity. It was not how good a person was that could save them, not the amount of good works that they had done. It was the work of Christ for them in dying and rising again that delivered salvation to people. Luther began to preach this good news of grace in his classroom and in the church in Wittenberg. He also began to look more closely at some things the church did in those days. One of these was selling indulgences. An indulgence was a piece of paper that a person could buy that promised forgiveness of sins, either for yourself or for someone you cared about. By giving the church some money, people were being told they could buy their way out of the punishment for sin. But this is the exact opposite of what the Bible said about the forgiveness of sins. No money could ever buy this, yet Jesus gave it freely. To confront this bad practice, on October 31st, 1517, Martin Luther wrote a series of 95 theses. A thesis is a statement intended for debate. In these 95 theses, Luther argued that the church's practice of selling indulgences and in looking at one's own good works for salvation was not what God intended for people. Instead, God intended for people to know their sins are freely forgiven as a gift of his grace, love, and mercy. Luther nailed these 95 theses to the church door so that the priests and teachers could see them and talk about them. Something else happened, though. The people who were not priests and teachers also read the statements, and they agreed with Luther. They were upset that the church was demanding money for forgiveness. Luther's statements were copied, printed, and given to people throughout Germany. And what he intended to spark a little bit of discussion soon changed the world, beginning what we now call the Reformation.
We'll talk more about that next time, but for now, turn to Lesson 28 in your Passport to Confirmation books. I have a few things that I need you to write down for this week. First, our word of the lesson for Lesson 28. It's the word thesis, which is the root word of the 95 theses. So if you write that down, Thesis, thesis. We'll also have you write down the Bible verse for this week, which is Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5, which reads, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding." Again, that's Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5. You can write that down and then practice saying it this week. And then our catechism selection this time, which is the fourth commandment, which reads, "Honor your father and your mother." What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not despise or anger our parents or other authorities, but honor them, serve and obey them, love and cherish them. you can talk a bit about what that means as well this upcoming week. That's it for this time. Come back again next week. We'll again continue talking about the life and the work of Martin Luther. But until then, God's blessings to you on your week.